Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Matters of the Heart and Soul podcast. This is Janie and Russell together.
Peace.
All right, so on this episode, we're talking about the great change that we are in the midst of, the great transformation. And we want to talk about this from the collective. Okay, one of the universal principles is the law of correspondence. And what that law says is that everything that happens within us also happens without, and everything that happens above also happens below. And so, what that means is that there's things that's occurring on different dimensions and different planes of existence at the same time. So there could be a lot of personal transformations, personal changes that you're seeing all around you, but it's also happening collectively. All right. And so we want to talk about what's occurring collectively. There's a lot of old constructs dying, and we want to talk about it because whether we want to admit this or not, we are really in the midst of it. It's no longer on the way. We are in the midst of it. And we need to be aware, be conscious of what's happening. So we're going to talk about that.
Yeah. So, even if people aren't paying attention, it's happening around us. We see it as it plays out in the political scene, as it plays out in religion, as it plays out economics, education, relationships. So we're going to touch on all these different facets and also kind of give our take on what we see is some perceivable solutions.
Yeah, we're in a collective transformation. So we're going to talk about a few topics. The first one is relationships. The old construct of relationships is dying. And what I think is that the old constructs where it's based on physical, material, what you could do for me, that construct is really, really dying. And we're moving into more of a collaboration, more conscious relationships, more purpose, mental, physical relationships.
Big time. And we even mentioned that in our book. That's over here. In this book, in chapter 7, we talked about how we're rapidly moving from the third dimension into the fourth and fifth dimension. And, that's really just different parallels of energy and consciousness, right? So historically, we're coming out of that era where men sort of dominated women. So this is dealing with male, female, or masculine, feminine relationships right now that we're talking about. But it does, apply in some sense to relationships with friends and coworkers, etc. But in male-female relationships, in the past, up until the 60s, women didn't have the right to vote. They really weren't working per se. In spaces they were right after Second World War. But it's like they didn't have that much power. So what we perceived as love back then was different, right? So it's like you go back to the agricultural age. If a man had a lot of horses, cattle, and farmland or whatever, he might just ride upon a horse and say, May, that sure is a fine young daughter you have there. I'd like to take her for my wife. And he throws her on the back of the horse and he rides off in the sunset. She waves bye to her mom and dad. He gives her a lot of babies, and he might have 3 or 4 families, but that's the way relationships were, and it was love. But now, we're getting into this era where, women have more rights, which is by right, it's the right thing to do. There's a difference though between women's right and staunch feminism. That's a whole nother story. But women are working, they're making their own money. So now relationships are a little bit different, right? So it's not this male chauvinistic dominated type relationship. It's more or less dealing with equity and not so much splitting the bills 50-50 or anything like that. That the woman has a voice. She has things that she does well. And, I think sometimes in a household, we need to delegate. Like a man can't do 100% of everything, nor can the woman. So it's like what you do now, instead of competing and having this hierarchical relationship, you have more of a collaborative effort in order, to meet the demands for the common good.
Or even these expectations of what you think a woman should do or what a man should do according to how you grew up in your childhood, or according to your religion, or according to just societal norms. We're moving away from that. Like we're being more collaborative and unified in our relationships. And another thing I want to mention about that is that there is an awakening of the divine feminine energy. All right. And we really got to talk about that, because the aspect of the feminine has been suppressed for a long time. And I think we really should thank religion for that, because, and it goes way back, but the aspect has been suppressed, and that feminine aspect is waking up. She's rising, and sometimes when things rise, it's chaotic at first. It has to be healed. So you see a lot of things happening, in the feminine energy, but you have to make space for it. You have to make space for this energy to rise, for it to be chaotic, for it to heal, and then for it to get in its rightful place, which is alongside the masculine energy. And it's side by side. And that's what I'm saying. Unification in our relationships is where we're going. We're not like these, I think these roles of what was placed on us, and a lot of it comes from, again, religion and how you were raised and all that, but you have to really look at what works in your house, with your significant other. So
yeah, you just touched on a nerve of a lot of people out there. And when you hear that, like what she said is that religion played a role, it definitely played a role. So if you look back, let's just talk about
and not only
religion, it's
religion,
not only
but we know a lot of people live their life and have their beliefs and their values according to religion.
Right, but let me say this though, because a lot of people realistically have no historical reference as to how and when a lot of this changed, right? So let's just talk about the United States of America, for example. At its inception, so say 1492, Columbus sails over to the Americas. He never came to North America, by the way. So he goes in to the islands like Puerto Rico and to Haiti, things of that on, his 4 voyages. But he goes back and he goes, hey, these people live over here in this paradise, right? It's very temporal climate. They have all the fruits, vegetables, they're like growing cotton, they're trading it with other countries, tobacco, like all these great things. So the Pope puts out what they call the Dum Diversas, or the Doctrine of Discovery, stating that any non-Christian country or nation, they had the right to discover. So they went out pillaging the Americas because the indigenous people here were more into natural forms of spirituality, Africa, different parts of the Far East. And they went out conquering the world because at that time, the church had the power. So study the history of slavery, a lot of that stuff came out of the church in these different conquests, because 1492 is actually when the Moorish Empire in Spain fell, or say the Iberian Peninsula, after the Moors that ruled there from 711 to 1492. And like months later, Ferdinand and Isabella send Columbus all out to so-called discover new territories. He knew exactly where he was going, but their religion played a major role. And even coming up to the time of the establishment of the 13 colonies with King James Stuart, who was King James VI of Scotland, King James I of England. He ruled both. He was the first monarch to rule both kingdoms, and he united like Scotland, Ireland, Wales, and Great Britain to form the United Kingdom. And he came to America and established, the first of the 13 colonies, which were Virginia. And then along with his son, King Charles I, King Charles II, his grandson, and then also James II. But anyway, with that, they actually came in. If you read a lot of that paperwork, religion played a major role in the establishment of the 13 colonies in America. And anybody that's honest with themselves, it is very sexist at the core. Like just the hint, like saying God is he, um, putting women in a submissive role to the point where they didn't even want them in the pulpit. And it was really through the religion that they not only subdued groups of people and colonized groups of people, they colonized women.
All right, and we're gonna talk about religion and spirituality as a part, but so I'll save what I want to add to that. All right, so that's relationships. The other thing I want to add before we move on is that you could be in situations where your relationships are changing. You could be in situations where the relationship is no longer serving you because you are transforming. So remember, we are in a collective transformation, but it happens individually. So you have to evaluate your relationships right now. Are you in an old construct and it has to dismantle? And sometimes it doesn't mean you have to get rid of that person or no longer be in a relationship with that person, but maybe the dynamics have to change. Maybe, how y'all were doing things were one way and now it's time to change because it's a part of an old paradigm that's literally falling right now. So, and one last thing, we're seeing a lot of people transitioning from this physical world. And that's a part of relationships because we have a lot of people, dying because they're not going to be moving on to this new way of living. So a lot of family, a lot of friends are passing away. They're choosing to transition because the soul chooses when they decide to get out of here. So that's on a whole spiritual level, but our relationships are changing, and we have to look at that, right, with both physical eyes and spiritual eyes. All right, moving on to business. How are the old constructs of business dying and falling away?
So we're moving away from the old hierarchical type of corporate setup and moving more into collaboration. So you notice like a lot of the major corporations, one that I work at daily, uh, they're changing even the way the buildings are laid out. They're creating more conference rooms. So there's more collaborative efforts, to meet goals instead of people sitting in traditional pods or at desk or locked up in the office solo and not communicating with each other. And it took a lot longer to accomplish goals. Now you have more video conferencing, especially after COVID when everybody was home and, you had to go to video. And then now that everybody's back, or in some cases, some people never went back, or 50% of the staff is back, video conferences has also changed it. So there's more collaboration now that's taking place in getting away from competition. And we've seen the companies that were able to make that adjustment, they're thriving. Matter of fact, they thrived during that period. And even in fast food industry, you see a lot of people changing the way the drive-throughs and so forth are set up, and they tend to mimic those companies that had great success. And one other thing I'll mention is, once again, like women back in the past were not a big part of the workforce. Now there's actually more women in the workforce than men, and there's more of this Generation X age in the workforce. So the workforce today looks totally different than it did, say, 1940 and 1960.
Yeah. And I want to just add, we're digital. We're more digital. We are literally meeting the needs in a very digital way. So if you are one of these people who resist change and don't like all the digital stuff, I'm telling you, get on board because you will get left behind. Like, even before, when people didn't want to text, those people got left behind. So we are becoming more and more and more digital. I'm noticing when you call certain, businesses, no one even answers the phone. It's like you have to leave a message or send an email or something like that.
Speak to a VRU.
Yeah, it's becoming very, very digital, and information is accelerating. So we have access to so much information right now, and people are being creative in how they are creating businesses and conducting business. So business is changing.
Yeah, and so they said that it took all the way up to the 1900s for knowledge and technology to double, and then from the 1900s to 2000, so it took 100 years the next time to double. Then from 2000 to 2020, it took 20 years for knowledge and technology to double. And now we're in an era where they're saying it's doubling every 72 days. So you can see now with AI, things are like just right at your fingertips. And now that's good and bad, right? Because a lot of times, like when you used to Google things, you would have to go to individual pages and sort through information. Now, instead of going, say, to 10 different pages with AI, it'll take those 10 pages and give you a synopsis of those 10 pages. Now, if the information that was in there was bogus and incorrect or biased, then the answers you're going to get is biased. So you still need to do a lot of research. But in some cases where it's a non-biased situation, it can very well speed up the process. Because
Yeah. And I think AI is here. I think we shouldn't be afraid of it. I think you have to use it for its good, right? For the greater good. And I think that if you know your stuff, there's nothing AI could take away from you. Like there's nothing it could really take away from you. But I think collaboration versus competition is definitely in business right now. Because I think we're seeing that in order for some businesses to survive, you have to collaborate with other business owners. That's just where we're headed. So,
and so one more thing on about AI, because I seen what Elon Musk and several of those others were saying, they thought that AI can turn into a bad thing, but they're using it in their business to make billions, right? So it's just like anything else, just like the internet, smartphone. When all this stuff came out, like I remember when the microwave came out, like my grandmother thought it was a devil. She won one at bingo, and she was like, "Baby, you want this microwave?" She didn't want to touch it.
yeah.
Not saying that is a good thing.
Yeah,
but
because we don't really use it. But
but one more thing. But when it comes to AI, it's like you're giving too much power to those people that can use it for evil. Why don't you do it and use it for good? So it's like, the people, we get caught up into this fear and it paralyzes us, right?
yeah.
But in most cases, fear should be used as your source of motivation instead of like just laying down and playing possum.
Yeah, I agree. All right, so moving on to the next one, let's talk about what's the construct that's falling away in religion. So I definitely think we are moving away from the understanding that God is outside of us, right? Like God is some personification, some person, some being that's outside of us. That's an old construct, and that is dying. And it's all about evolution of consciousness, all about understanding and becoming and evolving. We're being forced to evolve, period. We are understanding that this energy, this presence of what we term as God is within us, all right? That's what we're coming into the knowing and the understanding of. So we're going to hear more about energy and vibration, because the term God is not a person. It's just energy. It's energy. And we're going to be more into the terms of energy, vibration, and frequency. All right. So we have to kind of understand the old constructs that's dying. Right. And we're going to understand who we are on a soul level. We're also leaving just the pure physical consciousness and awareness that all we know is what we see with our five senses. So we're going to leave the fact that all we know is what somebody do, what they look like, what they wear, their house, and judging people according to that. We're moving into our soul. We're moving into understanding who we are on a soul level. And that's the evolution of consciousness. And that's where we're moving. The old construct is dying, whereas pure physical level, pure physical consciousness, as Russell mentioned earlier, that's a 3D consciousness. And we're moving beyond that. So.
Yeah, and that doesn't mean that we're changing what God is or whatever.
We're changing
what
our
it is,
understanding and
we're
perception
getting,
of it.
right, we're getting a deeper understanding, because if you look, like, let me go back before I say this. So we're going from an age of belief to an age of knowing. So you don't know something that you believe, right? So if you're getting ready to get on a plane and fly, say, from New York to LA, would you get on the plane where the pilot says, I believe I can get you there? Or would you get on the one that says, I know I can get you there? So we're moving from that age of Pisces into Aquarius, and this is not no astrological woo-woo. You got a map in your house or your school right now that says Tropic of Cancer and Capricorn. You got a watch that has 12 hours in the AM, 12 in the PM, is all based upon the same science, right? You have a birthday, you have a calendar, all of this based upon the same thing. So don't go there, right? So going back to saying God is a man who sits up there, right? That is starting to get dismantled. That God, to me, and most people I talk that really delve into this, you got to look at God as an energetic force or some type of electromagnetic. At the end of the day, it's still energy, right? It's the one thing that can not be created nor destroyed, and it moves, changes shape and form, and it's in everything and everybody. So when you talk about omnipresence, you have to talk about energy, and that's not a man, right? So even when it goes back to the Trinity, you have a Father, Son, and a Holy Ghost, and they totally eliminated the woman. Now, this is a new construct. Get mad or research. You got to do one or the other, right? So it's like you don't get a father or a son without them being birthed through a womb of a woman. All right. And so does that make the Holy Ghost the feminine principle? Could be. Or if you could go back into the ancient world, and we'll just use Egypt because most people understand Egypt when you're dealing with Isis, Osiris, and Horus, which is dealing with the Holy Trinity of the Father, Mother, and the Son. So that's where a lot of it originated. So if you're wanting to create a culture that's male dominant, you'll eliminate the woman. You come up with stories saying that the woman came from a man's rib. Now, I know a lot of you want to be butthurt and in your feelings about this, but a lot of what we see in the Bible is allegory.
Metaphors.
It's very metaphoric. It's dealing with.
You can't take it literal.
No, you can't.
That's
yeah, like even
dismantling.
Even the term Holy Bible comes from the Greek and Latin words Helios Biblios, which means the book of the sun, the S-U-N, dealing with the sun and its 12 companions, which is dealing with the 12 gates of the zodiac. I did a video on this a while back. We could probably tap this in at the end, right? But anyway, a lot of this stuff, people are starting to find out that, hey, a lot of this is allegory. I challenge any of you out there to go find the gravesite for any of these prophets in the Bible, any of these biblical characters, right? You can't find it. And if you can, call me up and I'll pay for your flight and I'll go with you and we'll go find these gravesites, right? Then also you have a situation where when you start studying the ancient civilization. You can go back into Egypt and you can find the tombs and the mummies, not only just in Egypt, but even in the Americas. You could find these tombs that predate. The Bible story starts 4004 BC. These pharaohs and kings of the ancient world were 10, 12, even maybe 30,000 years ago. You could find their bodies. How come you can't find the bodies of these people who people say lived 2 to 4,000 years ago?
Mhm.
So you got to be real with yourself. And one of the things now I'm big on is genealogy, because it's like people will fight and foam at the mouth about characters that lived thousands of years ago in lands far, far away in time immemorial, but you don't even know your great grandparents. You don't know where they lived. You don't know their names. You don't know what they did. You don't know what happened to them. So it's like, you got to think about it. Somebody miseducated you. Matter of fact, all of America, for the most part, is miseducated. That's why we say you have to kind of throw out everything you know, like they say, and come back as a baby and rebuild with real knowledge. And you're not going to get it in the classroom.
So our next topic was the education system, like the things that were taught. Like, I think you have to get two educations, right?
That's right.
The one that you need to know to live in this dimension, and then the one you give yourself, which is knowledge of self. And a lot of times when you go through that journey and that process, it is literally unlearning all the things that you were taught through society, through your parents, you know, what you believe to be true, through history books in school, right? So all of this is dismantling. But before we get to education, I want you to finish up what you were saying.
Yeah, and we could actually tie it together, because, you know, this whole religious thing, right? And let's get back to Dr. John Henry Clark just said, all these religions for the most part are like male chauvinist murder cults, because it's like more people have died in the name of religion. So we have people, even if you study the history of slavery in America, or the Atlantic, or yeah, we'll call it the Atlantic slave trade, because it didn't happen the way most people think. But even going back, when we talk about, say, men and women, right? So we understand basic genetics, that you can get the recessive from the dominant, but you can't get the dominant from the recessive, right? So when it comes to the male and female species, it still applies, right? You can get the recessive from the dominant, but you can't get the dominant from the recessive. So in the beginning, you know, you read scripture, it talks about Adam, and it talks about, you know, one chapter, it talks about Adam, then there's another Adam, then he says he created them two alike, Adam and Eve. But look at this. A man has an X chromosome and then a Y chromosome, right? Take the kickstand off, or the rib, because you have a junction point, and you take this part off to create a Y. You could take that rib off, right? So the woman is XX and the man is XY. You can go out, do your research now, you can Google it. The Y chromosome is a degenerate form of the X. It has a fraction of the DNA of the X chromosome. And if you research to see which is the oldest, is the X. So how do you come up with this male deity and start off humanity with, you know, the first creation being a male, and then creating a woman from the rib, and all humanity coming from that? Like, I asked a question one day on Facebook just to see what people would think. Did it apply to lions and chimpanzees? Did the Most High create a male lion and the female was created from the rib? No, it didn't happen like that.
And you'll get, I think, still a split on that. I think you'll get a split on that.
Yeah, people will, because it's like, people, if you just really study nature, right? And everything's dealing with harmony and balance and vibration, right? there's a scientist that was showing like how you could even put sand on a drum and vibrate it to different frequencies, and based upon those frequencies, it creates different patterns. It creates things that are, that appear to be like animals or human species or what have you, right? Or even universes. And then you look at a situation where like you have certain plants that grow, say, in Florida that won't grow out in the desert in Arizona. Like a cactus is not going to grow in Florida. So you have things like that. Whereas, we've been sold this bill of goods, even when it comes to human beings, that there was this monolithic approach to us coming into existence, whereas everything else was just dealing with the laws of nature, right? So there wasn't like the original bird that was created in Africa and it flew around the world and populated the rest of the earth, or you had a certain kind of fish that was in one area of the world and it swam and populated. No, they were popping up simultaneously everywhere, and they were different based upon the different vibrations of energy everywhere. And it's always been that way, and that's why you can't take certain crops to certain countries and grow them there. You have to grow them based upon the geography and the temperate climate. Like we're living in an age of knowing where we have to become critical thinkers and go deeper. And when you do that, then that's when you really tap into the spirit and the soul.
Yeah.
Because we're still trapped. We're trapped in this physical, dense body. We're nothing but spiritual beings, eternal spiritual beings having a temporary physical experience called life.
And we're connected through thought and through the mental, right? That's a universal law. And I always say that when you understand universal law, you could really win at life, and especially at this dimension, because we're connected through thought. And there is a universal energy that connects us all, right? And I think that's what our consciousness is evolving to, and knowing that for ourselves, right? And I think knowing also requires experience of that one energy, right? So it's no longer just blind following, and just because somebody say it is, that construct is dying. Like we're having real experiences with the divine and knowing for ourselves. So
I want to say something, and I want you to elaborate on this because it was something you said the other day that we talked about. But when we look at, how do I want to say this? When we look at the universal prime cause that created everything and brought everything into existence, like we'll say God, so we're all on the same page, right? So if we looked at God more so from this universal energetic, you can't even say being, it's like a force that caused everything to come into creation and maintains it, right? This energy is in everything and everybody, and this energy is the law, right? So whether it's a rock, a person, or whatever, it all has energy potential. All right. And that energy spiritually is what connects us all, because your spirit is really just an energetic or a light body. That's why they say when somebody dies, the body goes cold, they give up the ghost, because it's an electrical light body that actually has a quantitative weight. There's been studies where people have donated their body to science, and people who were on their deathbed, they actually weighed them prior to after dying, and they weighed the human soul. I can't remember how many ounces it was, but we'll make sure we put this up on the screen. So if God is the law, this is why in scripture it says God's no respecter of person. So, and I'm just going to use something simple. We'll use the law of gravity here on Earth. So the law of gravity is not the same on the moon and on other planets. but it is the law here on earth.
Mhm.
And we're not arguing whether or not gravity exists. We call it gravity. You can call it whatever you want and get into that argument with somebody else. So the law of gravity, you can get somebody that's Christian, a Buddhist, a Muslim, that's Hebrew, Jewish, or what have you, and you put them all up on a roof, equal distance down to the ground.
Or Democratic or Republican.
Yeah, all these boxes, right?
Yeah.
And they jump off that roof. The law does not respect their person. It don't care what you believe.
Exactly.
The law is the law. What happens is we as a people are not following the law.
Yeah.
We're following man's law, and man's law has went against the law of nature or God's law. And so that takes you to what many call the Hermetic principles, but they're the laws or universal laws of nature. Do you want to just touch on that for a minute?
Yeah, so there's 7 Hermetic principles, and it goes back to Hermes, right? Or also known as Thoth. There's a lot of names because
depends on what culture.
Yeah, and because he's reincarnated eons and eons and eons and put these Hermetic principles out. And you could look this stuff up, it's everywhere. All right. And that's why it's so important to expand your mental space and do this self-teaching and go down that journey.
Let me say this before she goes on. He did not create them, he just wrote them. These are the laws of nature.
So these 7 Hermetic principles, and sometimes they're called universal laws, they're called laws of nature, and there's 7, and sometimes people expand them out to about 10 or 12 just to kind of break up some of what they are. But I started to study these laws and to really understand, like, if I stay within this law, I could literally really win on this dimension. And when I say this dimension, that's because there's so many planes of existence that we don't know about, right? So when we are on this dimension, right, humanity, right, on this earth, we're all playing according to certain laws, right? And I think I had told you, I said, it's almost like you gotta awaken to the fact that you're playing a game, number one. Right? Because some people don't even know it's a game. Once you awaken, then you got to learn the rules of the game, right? That's like a step 2. Then once you learn the rules of the game, you're like, wait a minute, now I can create my own game. Then you become the co-creator. And you're playing within these Hermetic principles that don't just govern me or Russell or all of us as humans, but it governs every plane of existence beyond where we're at in the physical. And that takes a level of consciousness, of understanding, of spiritual growth to understand what I just said. But if you could study these laws, you really understand what's happening in your life. Because there's also the law of cause and effect. Right? When bad things happen, we're like, oh my God, why is this happening to me? Because somewhere you were either the cause or the effect. And the thing is, sometimes it happens immediately where we know why this is happening, but sometimes it takes a long time to come back, sometimes in a different lifetime. And all these things are happening to you in your life, and it could have been another lifetime that you came back here to live out and balance out that karma. So that's a whole nother podcast.
Yeah, and let me say one more thing before I forget about it, just to go back when we were talking about how everything switched over. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, but these are the things that we have to know. We're not just following blindly, that construct of just believing and hoping and having faith. But let me tell you, what you speak has to be followed by action. You do have to visualize, and that's why faith is used a lot in religion. But there's a part of action that religion don't talk about. So we're not just
it does,
following.
but people ignore it.
Yeah,
it says faith without works is dead.
Yeah, and it's just we could just cut straight to it, right? And not have to go through all these metaphors and allegories and talking about all these characters. We are it. We are living out this, and we are here to be self-masters. So, but go ahead. And then we're gonna move off this religion and spirituality because this will go
This
on.
could go on for hours, but just going back to when we were talking about how women became dominated because everything flipped from being a matriarchal society into a patriarch, right? Where there was once, it wasn't that women dominated, they were just held in higher esteem, and you had the male and female sitting on the throne next to each other. That's why you see in ancient Egypt, you would always see the pharaoh and the queen like sitting there together, right? And then what happened? They went in, when the Greeks and Romans went in, they chiseled the woman out, and only the man was there. And then if you look in the history of their cultures, that explain to you why a lot of them, they really didn't like women too much in some of those cultures. But you had a situation like even here in America, if you study like our indigenous culture here in the Americas, a lot of times the land was in the woman's name, like it was handed down to the women. So I don't know if any of you seen the movie Killers of the Flower Moon. I recommend you see that story because it's really based upon the indigenous stories here in America. They had a little creative genius in there too because they put Black Wall Street was just a little segment in there they were watching on the screen, but a lot of it had to do with that culture, how, the immigrants who came in were marrying into the families, trying to kill off the women so that they could inherit the land. And that happened a lot here in America. But I really just wanted to touch on that because we had passed and on to something else.
Okay.
Well, let's move forward.
Moving on. All right. Education. So we kind of touched on that a little bit. The biggest thing that I want to talk about is that we do have to break down the education system, things that was taught to us, our children, things like that, that is just not truth, half truths, all of that. So when Russell said, go through your genealogy, go through your lineage to know who you are. Talk to your grandparents, talk to your great grandparents, your great 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 grandparents to figure out who you are. Because, sometimes we're told we come from one place and that we never lived that. We never lived that story. So you got to know who you are. So I think education, that construct is dying. And also, the 4-year university path is dying too. I'm big on education. I think that it's a great path. It's not everybody's path. But I think that at one point, that was the only way to be successful. That was the only way to make it. And these young kids, they're choosing different paths. They're coming out, they're creating businesses, very creative and lucrative businesses, and they're not getting into the construct that was sold to us. You know what I'm saying? So that's pretty much what I have on education. Like I mentioned, is the two educations that you have. There's one that you're given, right? You have to come into this dimension. You're born, you're given a religion, a race, you're going in a family, and then you figure out that. But then there's this education that you have to give yourself, and that is knowledge of self. And when you do that journey, it breaks down and totally dismantle all the other stuff that you were taught. Because awakening is literally unlearning and relearning. That's literally what awakening is.
Facts. So yeah, if you look in the ancient world, education was not meant to like get a job or have a status because you had a PhD or MBA or anything like that. Knowledge was to save your soul because people were in darkness and knowledge is equivalent to light, right? So, it's like going into a dark room and finding a switch and turning the light on. And that's what knowledge, wisdom, and understanding does in this world we live in. So that reminded me of a quote, Carter G. Woodson, who was the father or founder of Black History Week that later evolved into Black History Month, which needs to be abolished because 90% of American history is Black history. And that's a whole nother story because we need to move away from the term Black and go back to our more indigenous titles.
And that's a whole nother podcast.
Yeah, that's a whole nother podcast too, but we'll use that one for now, just for the sake of commonality, right? So Carter G. Woodson said that, he was a Harvard Ivy League grad, and he stated that with all of his degrees and everything, he didn't have a knowledge of himself. So one of his quotes that I love is that in life, you're given two educations, one that's given to you, and then one that you give to yourself, and the latter being more valuable.
Yeah.
So it's like, once again, America has been miseducated. Like he wrote a book, Carter G. Woodson wrote a book called The Miseducation of the Negro. But I'm gonna do a podcast one day on the miseducation of America about the Negro, like who the Negro really is, and what that Holocaust and the miseducation process was for, because it was a crime of omission for commission. And if you also look at education early on here in America, Rockefeller stated that he did not want free thinkers. When he pumped all his money into the educational system, it was not to create free thinkers. He said he was creating workers. He did not want you to be free. So do you think that the people who are controlling you are, one, going to give you an education that's going to liberate you, two, give you a religion that's going to liberate you? These are things that we really have to become critical thinkers of. Now, that doesn't mean that God doesn't exist. It don't mean any of that. That's a cop-out, because most people don't want to go do research or do work or change, because most of people's problem today is that they're not healed and they see what they believe. So if you want to change what you see in the world and how things show up in your life, you really got to change the way you think and the way you act on a day-to-day basis. But it all starts in the mental, spiritual plane, even when it comes to illnesses.
And that's a universal law. That law says all is mental. The universe is mental. So when we understand that what you're thinking every day is creating your life and your future. So when you think your life is full of blessings, you're going to have a life full of blessings. But if you think your life is chaotic and terrible, you're going to live a life that's chaotic and terrible. So all is mental.
Yeah, and if you think you evolved from an ape versus being a spark of the divine, have that.
You're going to live that life too.
I'm a spark of the divine.
And we all are. We really
we all are, but
regardless of what was
some people
taught.
want to believe those stories.
Yeah. All right. Next is politics. Okay. The dismantling of politics.
The necessary evil.
All right. And I'm saying I like to use these universal principles because I don't want people to think that this is something I'm making up or this is something Russell's making up, like we're just pulling this out of the air. This has nothing to do with us. We're within the law, and we're just showing you how the law plays out in our world and in our everyday lives. So politics, okay, there is a universal law that says there's the law of polarity, all right, that says everything is the same in nature, but different in degree, okay? So hot and cold, both are temperatures, but different in degree, right? Black and white, both are colors, but different in degree. Democratic and Republic, both are political parties, but different in degree or beliefs. So the fact that construct is here lets you know that it could be here because it's within the law of polarity. But the more you polarize to one side or the other, the more you create karma with the things you say, which you put out on social media, the bashing of one side or the other. Remember, all is mental, and we are creating our lives by everything we say and think. So this duality it's starting to play out. And you gotta see that. Every 4 years, there's some social thing that happens. It sends humanity up in chaos, and then it becomes the war of the political agenda. Gotta see it.
Yeah, and it is become very cyclical.
Yes.
We always have, the exploitation of a police murder.
Yep.
Uh, and I want to be sympathetic to the families that are involved, but it's like you could look back every election, there was one that was brought to the forefront that was used as a political strategy, right? And, once again, there's this crime for omission for commission. And too many people are capitalizing off of the pain and the suffering of other people. You have, like, right now, is this really the best we have to offer? Like, I've met some of the most intelligent, brilliant human beings, and you see some of these people who have gone to amazing institutions and everything else. You mean to tell me that, like, where are these people at? Like, how do we end up here? It lets you know that there's another force and, another group of people who are actually at the top of this thing, right? So, she mentioned Democrat, Republican, but really at the end of the day, Malcolm X said it back in the 60s, and it holds true to this day. He was talking about how it's not so much that people are divided on Democrat, Republican, they're divided on liberal versus conservative. And like our people, like the so-called African American, Negro, colored person, mulatto, Indian, we've had so many darn titles. That's another story for another day. But if you go back and you look, like throughout the Southeast, we were big landowners at the end of the American Revolution, during Reconstruction era. We held a lot of wealth in this country, and it was not looked upon good by people who wanted our land, who wanted our wealth, and they went to war with our people. But during that time, we controlled the politics in the South and in most of these cities, right? And we were conservatives. And so we tend to be on the Republican side of things back in the day, right?
I think you should do a podcast on
Yeah,
that
I have to, because if you go back and you look during Reconstruction at the political, who were holding the political seats, say in Louisiana, it was a whole bunch of melanated people there, like New Wilmington in North Carolina, Chicago, Florida, Rosewood. And that's why a lot of these cities were, a lot of these race riots took place after the Civil War. There was a large influx of immigration that happened in between 1880 and 1930, where there was some 60 million immigrants that came into this country that didn't look like the people who were in these cities, in the KKK, the Night Riders, all this other stuff were used with the government during that time to overturn them. Most of you know about Black Wall Street in Oklahoma. You heard about the Indian Removal Act, how they moved the Indians out of the Southeast. But when you go to Oklahoma, most of these cities were so-called black towns, and smack dab in the middle where they moved these Indians was Tulsa, where black people were thriving. They found oil on the land because they were sent there to this so-called Indian territory that, supposedly had no real mineral wealth or whatever. And there they found oil. That's why that story, once again, Killers of the Flower Moon, talks about Osage, which is, say, about 30 miles north of Tulsa. This story is about these same people. So it's like history is told by the so-called victor, and everybody's been done a disservice, because now you have people walking around not knowing who the hell that they are, and some people thinking that they're less than, some people thinking they're greater than. And at the same time, all of us are getting our clocks cleaned by an elite group of people. And it's such a small number of people that if the rest of us just woke up, which is happening, and that's why we do what we do as far as the podcast because awakening, like this is an apocalypse and it's a revealing. This is what Revelation was about. It's a great revealing. It was no accident. All of a sudden now Putin comes out pulling out these 400-year-old portraits and so forth that were buried in Russia, showing that these ancient Hebrew people, what they look like and who was actually there. Because there's been a displacement and a rearranging of a people throughout the globe, throughout Europe, throughout Russia, throughout Africa, throughout China, and all these different areas, and especially here in America. So if we're going to be honest with each other and we want to see change, it can no longer be this competition where we're at each other and we're fighting. There'll never be a winner that way. What we're going to have to do is learn how to collaborate. Let's lay everything on the table. Like once again,
self-governing,
yeah, self-governing. That's the way it started.
Yeah, we
So
have to be self-governing. And
I'll let you go. Go ahead. Go ahead.
go ahead,
No,
finish
no,
your
no, no,
thought.
no. Go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say that, like, just what I see playing out. I mean, people literally, are not talking to family members and friends and coworkers. And come November 3rd, the next day when you wake up, will your life really change? And I'll say that for me, I've always just gotten the greater good of whatever was happening or whoever was in office, right? And people are going to do life and choose life according to what they need. And that's everybody's different. Somebody who is dependent on a welfare check is going to see life different than that business owner who's hustling every day trying to get their small business to survive. So you have to stay in the middle. You have to overcome this duality and not be so polarized, because that's a part of this construct.
The manipulation.
Yeah, it's
That's
a
why
part of
you're
the
being manipulated.
construct, and you really do get manipulated. And if you literally, like Russell said, if you start to go back every 4 years, 4 years ago, we were in the midst of COVID and it was all this other stuff, every 4 years, there is something that happens that sends us up in chaos. And so we have to get out of fear, because if you think about, and that's another thing, it puts us in fear and it makes you feel like there is a lack, right? In resources. Oh my God, there's not enough money. And oh my God, if I don't vote for this person, I won't get this. And that right there is not, it's an illusion, because we are abundant. That is our birthright. And that lack that puts us, that these politics puts us in the political agendas. I understand politics is needed, but it's the agendas behind it. It puts us in lack, and we are not in lack, and we could be self-governing.
Yeah, because it's like you just see people motivating people by fear, and there's no real policies in place to help make their lives better. And going back to, like you were saying, somebody who has a business, the more conservative approach, less government, less taxes.
Mhm.
Somebody who has been like chased off their land, like their ancestors had hundreds of acres. Like I did a podcast showing how George Floyd's great-great-grandfather, Hillary Stort Sr., had 500 acres of land that he was swindled out of his land. Yep. So they went from being a wealthy family to living a life of poverty all the way down to his mother. So now you have a kid that should have been grown up into like a kingdom. Like they should have had a lot of wealth. Now he grows up in poverty and he ends up, he's in a store and he writes a bad check. And the next thing you know, his life is ending. But it's things like that. And if we go back, people want to talk about reparations and ask them, are you getting reparations for slavery? Well, if you go back and study slavery, white folks were on these plantations as well. So you can't get it based upon race. But what you can do, like what happened, like I said, a lot of the families in the South, you can go and do your genealogy and see the records. Your family owned land. They did not sell it. They were either chased off of it, swindled off it, or whatever. The patents are still there. And if you go back and claim your land, you could reclaim your wealth. Now, that's what you need to be going to these potential presidents, asking them for. Quit asking for handouts or welfare check. They're giving all this money to foreigners and they have no respect for you. None. It's like because these same people came in here and went to war with you, and now they're giving all of your wealth, your tax dollars to people who have no stake whatsoever here. They're going to bring them here. They're going to put them in the military. They're going to give them the jobs and make them citizens. Now, if they came here the correct way, that there's no problems with that, I'm sure. But if we're not taking care of the people who are already here, who built this country, there should be a problem with that. But if you don't know, that's different. So, Kwame Ture once said something that made a lot of sense. He said, ignorance has never been a means for debate. A lot of people out here debating things and they have no knowledge of what the hell they're talking about. They have no reference of history. They have no reference of anything. It's all emotion. And these people are playing on your emotions. Black, white, brown, yellow, what have you. And all those are crayon colors. It means nothing because there are people here with driver's license that immigrated. MENA, MENA, Google, MENA, Middle Eastern North African. Somebody could come from the Middle East, North Africa. They're classified as white in this country. It has nothing to do with skin complexion. It has more to do with status. Black is a status. It means you're dead in law. We need to start digging deeper and get out of all this racial construct and pit each other against each other because our clocks are getting cleaned by the same people. We need to come together, come up with viable solutions, come up with real candidates to put in office, people who have some form of integrity, that are benevolent people that are looking out for the greater good of humanity. I really personally think this is the last election we're going to see on this type of platform where the best liar wins, because it's like people are getting sick of it. This is the last thing, and I'm gonna shut up.
Yeah, it's definitely playing out.
Zbigniew Brzezinski wrote a book called The Grand Chessboard, and another one I think was called The Choice. So he played a major role in Barack Obama getting elected. He was actually Barack's counselor when he was at Columbia. He made a comment that the people, he actually died within the last 5 years, I think. He made a comment. He stated that it was once easier to control 1 million people, but he said today it's a lot easier to kill 1 million people. So this guy sat on the head of, as a foreign affairs advisor to at least 5 presidents, right? Played a major role in world politics, in military strategy, what have you. For him to make a comment like that, is powerful. So, I recommend that you read some of his work because a lot of things that he was saying in his books are playing out today, on how to deal with Russia and China and all this stuff like this. But the main thing is he was stating that the people were waking up. And at one point, America was insulated with the Pacific and the Atlantic Ocean, to keep people from coming in militarily. But now with the influx of immigrants and, with technology, the world has become this small because with the touch of your thumb, you could actually communicate with somebody at any point on this face of the earth in milliseconds.
Yeah.
I digress.
You done. All right. So that's it. One last one. Healthcare. Then we're gonna wrap up this podcast. So we saw this in 2020. We saw healthcare dismantle. We really saw that, and we have seen it dismantle since then. I think people are not just believing that I have to take this medication and this is all I have to do. People are researching. They're looking for more holistic practices. And the construct of just treating symptoms is dying. We need true healing. Like, we have to heal. Like, we really, really have to heal. And all we're doing is putting Band-Aids on bullet wounds, and then we're bleeding all over. And then on all levels, mental, physical, spiritual, emotional. And again, like I said, when things change, it's chaotic, right? But you have to allow space for that chaos and that dust to settle. But we need healing. We need healing, and we have to have it on a human level. All right. And, I think when we understand healing, we understand who we are, we won't depend so much on everything external to bring us peace, to bring us joy, to bring us abundance. We won't have to, think that the politician that's running is here to save us. We have to save ourselves, like literally.
Look at the man in the mirror.
Yeah, so I think the construct of healthcare is definitely dismantling where we are going to holistic practices. We're learning that the sun and eating fruits and vegetables and meditating and grounding and resting and being, and not in this masculine energy of doing, hustle, go get it, go get it, go get it. That is a physical, material way of existing, and that too is dismantling.
Like, we can go on forever, but
anything you want to add?
I'm gonna be short on this one, because these are things that we talk like this all the time during dinner or just sitting around. It's like we don't turn the television on because we spend so much time talking, right? We communicate, right? So like we always talk about, as far as when it comes to health, how big of a role your spirituality plays, like your mental, spiritual existence plays such a major role, because your physical body is no more than a chemical factory, right? So it's like, if I came to you with some great news saying, hey, I just found out you just won $1 million and we can go pick it up in the next 2 hours. We got to go down there. Your name was pulled, whatever. Or, just give somebody some great news, right? Like a childhood friend you hadn't seen in 30 years is in town and we're all going to go to dinner. Like, those things will cause endorphins and so forth in your body to start secreting, right? Or to look at the love of your life, or to hear her say she loves you, or he says, I love you, and really mean it and touch your soul. That stuff just gets you like down inside, right? So it's like these create endorphins in your body that heal your body, right?
Yeah,
the blood pressure is regulated, all these different things, you know what I'm saying? Your cholesterol levels stay at an optimal level, and it's all based upon thought. But on the other hand, somebody comes to you saying, hey, I just seen up the street, and mentioned like a family member just wrapped around a pole on a motorcycle, or what have you, say something real bad, and all of a sudden you're like, you're getting shorter of the breath, your heart's pounding, your blood pressure's going up. You know what I'm saying? So it's like your mind is going to cause this chemical reaction in your body. So it starts in the mental, spiritual mind. Then somebody else comes in, oh no, that wasn't them, that was somebody else, or whatever. You're like, so no different than a deer, right? Or a gazelle. The lion's chasing the gazelle. It's in fight or flight. It's adrenaline's pumping. It's running, and it gets away, and then it finds a pond, and it goes back to drinking water. But the chemicals in the body are constantly changing. So it changes with what goes on in the mental, spiritual mind. So that's why it's so important to not only watch what you take in is food, right? You should eat more fruits and vegetables to get more light, more alkalinity into your body, to regulate the blood and the saliva and so forth in your body. And you have to watch what you put into your mind by what you watch on television, like people that you're around. Because if you're around a lot of negativity and stress, and you're living in a war zone, it's like things like that will keep you stressed out, keep your blood pressure up.
Stomach issues,
all good, right? You could be eating good, but now your body's producing all these chemicals because of the environment behind what you're putting in, what other foods. So you have food that you eat, you have food, all your senses, what you smell, taste, hear, all of that plays a major role. So your spirituality, that's why we always say mind, body, soul. So your mental, physical, spiritual reality, they all have to be symbiotic in order for you to live a healthy life. So because your subconscious mind doesn't know the difference between what's real and not. So if you're somebody who loves sitting up watching scary movies all day and eating pizza and drinking Coca-Cola, you're ruining your health.
Yeah, we're multi-dimensional, and so we can no longer do healthcare just on the physical. We have to include our mental, emotional, and spiritual in healing and in healthcare, and we're moving towards that. So, I think a lot of providers are understanding that. I see in healthcare the training is coming in to include all those things. But if you see a healthcare provider and they're not asking you about your sleep, if you're going in there with high blood pressure, they're not asking you about stress. They're not asking you about your emotions and diet, and strictly only want to treat your numbers with medication. I want you to think twice about that. I'm not saying don't take the medication. This is not medical advice. I'm saying think twice about it. All right, because you are multidimensional and it requires your physical, your mental, your emotional, and your spiritual for alignment, true alignment. And if anything is out of whack, you can develop physical symptoms because of that. So that construct of healthcare is dying. All right, we're not just going to be looking at the physical and treating symptoms. We are looking for true healing and not just slapping a Band-Aid on it.
Facts.
All right, so that's it. Do you have anything else?
No, because let's save some for another podcast. We can't give it all out on one.
Yeah. So, guys, this has been another episode of Matters of the Heart and Soul podcast. Janie and Russell. As you know, this is our mission work. We enjoy this. This is why we're here. This is why we came together. This is so much of who we are. So we appreciate you guys. Please like, subscribe, share, and we'll catch you guys next time.
Peace.